is a moment in every superstar's career when the world expects more. More music, more visibility, more access. The machine doesn't slow down just because the person inside it wants to breathe. In fact, that's usually when the pressure increases. Fame has a way of punishing absence. Step back too long, and relevance is supposed to fade. Silence is meant to weaken power. But sometimes, silence does the opposite. Some figures don't vanish when they step away. They hover. They remain present without showing up. Their influence lingers in rooms they no longer enter, in conversations they no longer lead. And slowly, it becomes clear that what they built was never dependent on constant output. It was structural. Music history is filled with artists who disappeared and were forgotten. Careers that stalled the moment momentum stopped. Audiences that moved on the second the sound went quiet. That's how it's supposed to work. Except it didn't. Years passed. No albums, no tours, no reinvention campaign. And yet, the name never left. The influence didn't shrink. The authority didn't erode. If anything, it solidified. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't burnout. And it definitely wasn't a loss of relevance. It was a shift in power. Because there's a difference between being visible and being dominant. One requires constant presence. The other requires control. And control doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly, often misunderstood until it's undeniable. Rihanna didn't disappear from music because she couldn't continue. She stepped away because she didn't need to prove anything anymore. And once you understand how she managed to leave the spotlight without surrendering influence, her silence stops looking like absence and starts looking like strategy. Rihanna's power was never built on volume. It was built on positioning. From the beginning of her career, she moved differently. She released music often, yes, but she never chased approval. Her image evolved without apology. Her sound shifted without explanation. She didn't ask the audience for permission to change, she trained them to expect it. That distinction matters. Most artists depend on momentum. They stay visible because visibility is their leverage. If they disappear, the system replaces them. Rihanna understood early that this model burns people out. So instead of tying her relevance to constant output, she tied it to authority. Authority survives silence. As her musical success peaked, something subtle happened. Rihanna stopped behaving like someone who needed to compete. She wasn't fighting for chart positions or cultural dominance anymore. She already had it. And when you reach that point, continuing to flood the market becomes unnecessary, even risky. Overexposure erodes mystique. Repetition weakens control. So she slowed down. At first, the pause looked temporary. Fans expected a comeback cycle, a reinvention, an announcement. The industry is trained to read absence as a problem that needs fixing. But Rihanna didn't rush to reassure anyone. She didn't explain the gap. She let it stretch. That silence confused people, because women in music are rarely allowed to stop without consequences. When they pause, it's framed as decline, indecision, or loss of relevance. Rihanna's pause didn't fit that narrative. She wasn't fading, she was expanding, just not in the place everyone was watching. Power was shifting off stage. Instead of fighting for attention in music, she redirected attention toward ownership, toward infrastructure, toward building systems that didn't depend on applause to function. This is where her influence began to change shape. Artists usually monetize popularity. Rihanna converted popularity into control. She didn't attach herself to brands, she became one. She didn't rely on endorsement, she created ecosystems. And crucially, she did it without over-explaining. The public didn't see desperation or retreat. They saw confidence. Confidence changes how absence is interpreted. When someone leaves because they must, the world senses weakness. When someone leaves because they choose to, the world waits. Rihanna made people wait. Not out of hope, but out of recognition that she was operating on a different level. Her presence remained constant even without new music. Fashion, beauty, culture, influence. She wasn't chasing relevance. Relevance was orbiting her. And that inversion is rare. This is why her disappearance from music never felt like a loss of power. It felt like a recalibration. She had already proven everything music could prove. Awards, hits, longevity, cultural dominance. Continuing would have meant repeating herself for the sake of expectation. Stepping back preserved the value of what already existed, and it protected something more important: autonomy. Autonomy is what most artists lose when they stay too long in the same machine. Schedules tighten, creative freedom shrinks, output becomes obligation. Rihanna opted out before that erosion could take hold. That choice unsettled the industry. Because the industry is built on predictability, on cycles, on artists needing it more than it needs them. Rihanna disrupted that balance by becoming independent of the system that launched her. She didn't abandon music out of exhaustion. She outgrew the need to be validated by it. And that is a dangerous position for any system that thrives on dependency. The longer she stayed silent, the clearer it became. Rihanna had shifted from performer to power center. Someone whose absence didn't weaken her, but highlighted how much she had already consolidated. This wasn't retirement. It was leverage. And once leverage is established, everything changes. How time works, how expectations are managed, and how influence is measured. This is only the beginning of what her silence reveals. As Rihanna's silence extended, something unusual happened in the cultural conversation. Instead of fading into nostalgia, she became a reference point. Her absence didn't close the chapter on her influence, it clarified it. People weren't asking if she would return. They were asking when, and more importantly, on whose terms. That distinction is power. In the music industry, relevance is usually maintained through repetition. Release cycles, tours, visibility, interviews. Artists are taught that stepping away is dangerous, especially for women whose careers are often treated as fragile and time-bound. Rihanna violated that assumption completely. She demonstrated that relevance could be sustained without output as long as authority had already been established. Authority changes the rules. By the time she stopped releasing music, Rihanna was no longer just an artist. She was a cultural anchor. Her image, her attitude, her aesthetic had already shaped a generation. That kind of influence doesn't disappear when the sound stops. It lingers. It embeds itself into fashion, language, expectations. This is why her absence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt intentional. What many people missed was that Rihanna wasn't stepping away from creativity. She was redirecting it. The same instincts that made her a dominant artist were now being applied elsewhere. Control of image, understanding of audience, willingness to defy industry assumptions. These skills translated seamlessly into ownership. Ownership is where power consolidates. While the public focused on the lack of new music, Rihanna was building structures that didn't require constant approval, structures that generated influence quietly, consistently, and independently. She was no longer dependent on charts or critics to validate her position. She had created systems that functioned without noise. This shift also changed how she related to time. Artists tied to output live under constant deadlines. There is always a next release, a next tour, a next era to plan. Rihanna removed herself from that clock. She stopped measuring success in cycles and started measuring it in stability. That allowed patience, something rare in an industry addicted to immediacy. Patience is a luxury of power. It also protected her from the exhaustion that consumes so many long-running careers. Burnout is often framed as personal weakness, but it is usually structural. The demand to remain visible erodes creative autonomy. Rihanna avoided that erosion by stepping away before obligation replaced intention. Her silence, then, was not retreat. It was preservation. Preservation of creative agency. Preservation of identity. Preservation of leverage. The public's reaction to her absence revealed something important. Instead of losing interest, anticipation grew. Each year without new music increased curiosity rather than diminishing it. That inversion signaled that her value was no longer transactional. It wasn't tied to immediate gratification. It was tied to trust. Trust that when she returned, it would matter. Trust that she wouldn't release something unless it met her standards, not the industry's timetable. Trust that her silence meant deliberation, not indecision. That trust is difficult to earn and easy to lose. Rihanna earned it by being consistent in her refusal to compromise. Another layer of her power was how she handled expectation without feeding it. She didn't tease endlessly. She didn't offer vague promises. She didn't perform anticipation. She let the question exist without answering it. This frustrated some fans, but it reinforced her autonomy. She refused to let curiosity dictate her behavior. In doing so, she shifted the dynamic from demand to patience. The audience learned that access to her work was not guaranteed, and that realization elevated its perceived value. Scarcity, when chosen, amplifies authority. At the same time, Rihanna's cultural presence remained undeniable. Fashion moments, public appearances, business milestones, each one reminded people that she was not gone, she was simply operating elsewhere. This dual presence, absent from music, dominant in culture, confused traditional metrics of success. But confusion is often a sign of transition. Rihanna was transitioning from participant to architect, from contributor to controller, from someone navigating the industry to someone shaping the environment around it. That transition rarely happens loudly. It happens through withdrawal, through reorientation, through quiet accumulation. This also altered how risk functioned in her career. For most artists, time away increases risk. The audience moves on. Trends shift. Re-entry becomes harder. Rihanna reversed that equation. Time away reduced risk by protecting her brand from oversaturation. When she does return, she returns to an audience that hasn't been fatigued by excess. Fatigue kills influence faster than absence ever could. Her silence also challenged gendered expectations in entertainment. Women are often expected to justify pauses, to explain personal choices, to remain emotionally available to their audience. Rihanna offered no justification. She didn't frame her absence as sacrifice or struggle. She treated it as normal. Normalizing autonomy is disruptive. By refusing to explain herself, she refused the idea that her career required public approval. That refusal resonated beyond music. It positioned her as a figure of control in a system that often extracts control from its stars. What made this strategy effective was that it aligned with who she had always been publicly: unapologetic, self-directed, resistant to categorization. Her silence felt authentic because it was consistent with her established identity. Authenticity, in this context, is not about vulnerability. It is about coherence. Her actions matched her image. This coherence made her power durable. Durable power doesn't depend on constant reinforcement. It holds even when nothing new is being produced. It exists in reputation, in trust, in the expectation of quality rather than quantity. Rihanna's disappearance from music revealed that she had already won the game she was being asked to keep playing. Continuing would have added little and risked dilution. Stepping away preserved her position and expanded her influence. And as the years passed, it became clear that the most radical part of her silence was not what she stopped doing, but what she proved was possible. That an artist could leave the spotlight without surrendering control. That power could exist without performance. That relevance could survive without output. And that understanding reshaped how her entire career is viewed, not as a series of eras, but as a deliberate consolidation of influence. This was not the end of her musical story. It was the point where the story stopped being about music alone. As Rihanna's influence continued to operate without musical output, the industry began responding in subtle but telling ways. Her silence didn't create a vacuum, it created a reference. Other artists watched closely. Executives adjusted expectations. Conversations shifted from, "When will she release?" to, "How did she manage this without losing relevance?" That question unsettled traditional thinking. The music business depends on dependency. It works best when artists feel replaceable, when momentum feels fragile, when absence feels dangerous. Rihanna broke that psychological contract. She proved that once authority is established, dependency can be reversed. The system can need the artist more than the artist needs the system. That reversal is rare. Most careers peak and then chase the peak endlessly, mistaking repetition for sustainability. Rihanna recognized the difference between expansion and extraction. Continuing to produce music on demand would have extracted value from her brand without meaningfully expanding it. Stepping away protected what she had already built. Protection is an underappreciated form of power. This shift also reframed how audiences relate to her. Fans were no longer consuming Rihanna in real time. They were holding space for her. That changes the emotional dynamic. Consumption is passive. Waiting is active. Waiting invests the audience emotionally in the artist's autonomy rather than their availability. It also changes expectations. When artists release frequently, audiences expect immediacy. When they pause, audiences recalibrate. Rihanna trained her audience to accept her timeline rather than impose theirs. That training required consistency. Not mixed signals, not half returns, not appeasement. She held the line. Holding the line is difficult when pressure escalates. Every year without new music increased speculation. Headlines framed her silence as mystery, decline, or strategy, depending on perspective. Rihanna never corrected the framing. She let all interpretations exist simultaneously. That ambiguity was strategic. It prevented the narrative from settling into something she would later have to undo. Narratives are traps when you outgrow them. Another dimension of her power became visible during this period. Selectivity. Rihanna did not disappear from public life entirely. She appeared when it aligned with her priorities. Fashion events, cultural moments, business milestones, each appearance was intentional, not habitual. That selectivity made each moment feel consequential rather than routine. Routine diminishes impact. Selectivity concentrates it. This approach also insulated her from trend fatigue. Trends require participation to stay current. Rihanna didn't chase them, she let them pass. When she did engage, it felt definitive rather than reactive. That positioning kept her culturally central without forcing constant adaptation. Centrality without compliance is influence at its highest level. It also highlighted a key difference between popularity and power. Popularity requires maintenance. Power requires positioning. Rihanna shifted from the former to the latter. She no longer needed to win weekly charts or dominate radio cycles to assert relevance. Her relevance was structural, embedded in how culture referenced her even in her absence. That kind of relevance is not easily displaced. As time went on, it became clear that her silence had reset expectations not just for her, but for what a modern music career could look like. She demonstrated that longevity does not require constant output. That pauses do not have to be explained as burnout or reinvention. That stepping away can be an act of control rather than surrender. This was particularly significant for women in music. Female artists are often pressured to justify breaks, to package absence as vulnerability or struggle. Rihanna did neither. She did not frame her silence as sacrifice, she framed it as normal. That normalization challenged the idea that women's careers must remain visible to remain valid. Validity without visibility is threatening to systems built on exposure. Her power also reshaped how success is measured. Instead of metrics tied to release cycles, her success became evident in endurance. In how her name retained weight, in how her return, whenever it happens, remains an event rather than an obligation. That anticipation is not manufactured, it is earned. The longer Rihanna stayed silent, the more obvious it became that her career had entered a different phase. Not a decline, not a hiatus, but a consolidation. She had accumulated enough influence that action was optional. Optionality is the clearest indicator of power. When you can choose not to act and still shape outcomes, you are no longer reactive. This also explains why speculation about her return never damaged her position. Speculation keeps attention alive without demanding compliance. It places control firmly with the subject of speculation rather than the audience. Rihanna allowed curiosity to exist without satisfying it. That restraint elevated her status. Restraint is counterintuitive in entertainment. The industry teaches that giving less risks irrelevance. Rihanna proved that giving less can increase authority if the foundation is strong enough. Her foundation was built over years of consistency, adaptability, and unapologetic self-direction. This consistency made her silence legible as confidence rather than uncertainty. And confidence alters perception. When people believe you are in control, absence reads as choice. When they believe you are not, absence reads as failure. Rihanna ensured the former by never appearing desperate for return. She did not hint, tease, or reassure. She allowed the waiting itself to reinforce her position. This dynamic revealed a deeper truth about power in creative industries. Output creates momentum, but restraint creates leverage. Momentum is exhausting to maintain. Leverage compounds quietly. Rihanna chose leverage. And in doing so, she demonstrated that disappearing from music did not mean disappearing from power. It meant redefining where power lived. and proving that once it moves, it doesn't need to announce itself to be felt. This brings the story to its final movement. What her silence ultimately teaches about modern fame, autonomy, and the difference between stepping away and stepping above. In the end, Rihanna's silence was never a gap, it was a signal that she had crossed a threshold most artists never reach, the point where success no longer needs to be demonstrated, where relevance no longer depends on presence, where power exists independently of performance. The entertainment industry is built on motion. Release cycles, appearances, visibility. Constant proof that you still matter. Artists are trained to believe that stopping is dangerous, that absence invites replacement, that silence weakens authority. Rihanna disproved all of it. When she stepped away from music, nothing collapsed. The audience didn't move on. The culture didn't forget. The conversation didn't end. Instead, something more revealing happened. Anticipation replaced consumption. Curiosity replaced demand. Waiting replaced entitlement. That shift exposed a truth the industry prefers to hide. Real power does not require constant output. Fame is loud, power is quiet. Fame needs attention to survive. Power survives even when attention pauses. Rihanna understood this distinction intuitively. She had already given the industry everything it could ask for: hits, eras, reinventions, dominance. Continuing on the same path would not have expanded her influence, it would have diluted it. So she chose something rarer than productivity. She chose control. By stepping away without explanation, she rejected the idea that her life and career were owed to public consumption. She didn't frame her absence as burnout, trauma, or sacrifice. She didn't package it into a redemption arc. She normalized autonomy in a space that rarely allows it, especially for women. That refusal mattered. Because women in music are often expected to justify pauses, to remain emotionally available, to reassure audiences that they haven't lost ambition. Rihanna offered no reassurance. And in doing so, she shifted the balance of power away from expectation and back toward self-direction. She stopped performing relevance and started owning position. What makes this story powerful is not that Rihanna left music. Artists leave all the time. It's that she left without losing leverage. She didn't retreat into obscurity or nostalgia. She didn't cling to her past to remain visible. She built structures, cultural, financial, symbolic, that functioned without applause. Ownership replaced validation. Infrastructure replaced output. Authority replaced approval. That transition is the hardest move in any career because it requires trusting what you've already built. It requires accepting that your value is no longer transactional. It requires letting go of the comfort that comes from constant feedback. Most people can't do that. They mistake motion for security. They stay visible long after it stops serving them. They continue producing not because they want to, but because they're afraid of what silence might reveal. Rihanna wasn't. She trusted that her influence was durable, that her name carried weight without reinforcement, that her return, if and when it happens, would be meaningful precisely because it was not guaranteed. Guarantees cheapen power. Optionality strengthens it. Optionality is the ability to say no without consequence, to wait without fear, to act without urgency. And Rihanna achieved that by stepping away at the exact moment most artists feel pressured to do more. Her silence was not passive, it was strategic restraint. And restraint is uncomfortable to watch because it denies access. It forces audiences to sit with uncertainty. It refuses to satisfy curiosity on demand. But that discomfort is what separates consumption from respect. Rihanna moved from being consumed to being deferred to. That shift reshaped how success is measured. No charts, no release dates, no promotional cycles, yet her cultural authority remains intact. That alone challenges the core assumptions of the music industry. It proves that longevity is not built through constant presence, but through timing. That influence is not sustained by noise, but by coherence. That stepping away does not always mean stepping down. Rihanna didn't disappear from music because she couldn't continue. She disappeared because she had already won the game she was being asked to keep playing. And winning sometimes means leaving the table. Her story matters beyond celebrity. It reflects a broader truth about power in modern culture. Those who control their availability control their value. Those who resist overexposure protect their leverage. Those who refuse to explain themselves endlessly preserve authority. In a world addicted to immediacy, Rihanna chose patience. In an industry built on dependency, she chose independence. In a system that rewards constant performance, she chose silence. And silence, in her case, became louder than any comeback. If this story changed how you think about fame, if it made you realize that success doesn't always look like motion, and that power doesn't always announce itself, then it has done its job. If it made you question how many artists are trapped performing relevance instead of building autonomy, that matters even more. And if you want more long-form documentaries that look beyond headlines, stories about restraint, influence, and the unseen decisions behind public lives, stay with this channel. Subscribe for deep, thoughtful narratives. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. And share this video with someone who still believes silence is weakness. Because sometimes, the strongest move is not to speak louder, it's to stop speaking at all and let power speak for itself.